When you think about medieval warfare, you probably picture knights in shining armor, right? But behind every single sword and shield, there's this hidden story of industry, of technology, and a surprisingly global economy. So today, we're going to dive into the massive, interconnected world of the medieval arms industry. Let's just kick things off with a huge question. How do you arm an entire empire? And I don't just mean one army for one battle. I mean a vast military machine year after year for centuries on end. As you're about to see, the answer is way more complex than you might think. Okay, so forget that image of the lone blacksmith hammering away in some smoky little village forge. The reality, especially for the powerful states in the Eastern Mediterranean, was a massive, interconnected industry. We're talking about specialized manufacturing hubs and global trade on a scale that is just mind-boggling for the time. So, what was driving this incredible industrial effort? Well, to put it simply, a relentless, centuries-long arms race. Constant conflict meant there was a constant demand for better weapons, better armor, and better technology. And listen, the stakes could not have been higher. For the big powers in this region, the Fatimids, the Ayyubids, the Mamluks, military superiority wasn't just about glory. It was about pure survival. And that survival absolutely depended on having the most advanced military hardware you could get your hands on. So, where did all these weapons actually come from? Let's start by zooming in on the local production centers. We're going inside the workshops of the Islamic world, where raw materials were transformed into the actual tools of war. And this wasn't some scattered, random production. No way. It was concentrated in major industrial hubs. You had Damascus, which was legendary for its swords. Cairo was an absolute powerhouse for armor and entire naval fleets. Aleppo specialized in siege engines. And all across Syria and Egypt, smaller workshops were just cranking out specialized parts. This was organized, state-supported manufacturing. You've probably heard of Damascus steel, right? The name itself has become almost mythical. But it wasn't just a product of one city. It really represented a regional mastery of metallurgy, these incredibly sophisticated techniques for creating strong, flexible, patterned steel that was pretty much the envy of the known world. And this level of complexity wasn't just for swords. I mean, just look at the composite bow, the absolute superweapon of its day. This was not just a piece of wood. It was an advanced, multi-material piece of engineering. It combined wood, animal sinew, and horn to create a weapon that was both compact and unbelievably powerful. Every single step required a different material and a completely different skill set. But here's the twist. As incredible as all this local production was, it was only half the story. To really function, this war machine had to plug into a global arms market. Yeah, for all their incredible skill, the workshops in Syria and Egypt faced a massive resource problem. At the end of the day, they simply didn't have enough of the high-quality timber, iron, and other essential materials that they needed to sustain their arms industry. So they had to import everything, and their shopping list was extensive. Timber for ships and bows, that came from Anatolia and Lebanon. High-grade steel billets were imported from as far away as India and so-called Frankish Europe. That's the Christian kingdoms to the west. Even the birch bark for weatherproofing the bows had to be brought all the way from Central Asia. This was a truly global supply chain. I mean, the connections here are just staggering. You have European steel traveling clear across the Mediterranean just to become a sword in Damascus. You've got timber from Turkey being built into massive warships in Cairo. It's a stunning example of medieval globalization, all of it driven by the constant demands of war. All right, so how did this all come together? Let's take a look at how this incredible combination of local skill and global trade actually played out on the battlefield. These two warriors pretty much represent opposing military philosophies, and it's all embodied in their gear. The European Crusader Knight was basically a heavily armored tank, built for the shock of a massive head-on charge. The Mamluk warrior, on the other hand, was built for speed and ranged attack, relying on that powerful composite bow and much lighter armor. Each one was a product of their own, very distinct military-industrial complex. And this industry had to be incredibly adaptable. Facing the heavily armored Crusaders required one set of solutions, things like armor-piercing arrows. But then, when the Mongols invaded from the east, a totally different threat emerged. The Mamluks had to counter a highly mobile horse archer army, which forced them to refine their own cavalry and archery tactics just to match them. The industry had to constantly respond to every new threat. So, what does all of this, the specialized workshops, the global trade networks, the constant innovation, what does it all tell us? Well, it forces us to completely rethink our popular image of the so-called Dark Ages. This quote just perfectly captures the central paradox of this whole story. The very weapons that were used to divide and conquer were actually the products of a deeply interconnected world, where your enemies were often also your indispensable trading partners. And that's the real takeaway here. The medieval world wasn't just a bunch of isolated castles. It was a place of bustling ports, complex logistical networks, and a dynamic global economy. Studying how these empires armed themselves reveals just how sophisticated and connected their world really was. Which, leaves us with a final question to ponder. If this level of industrial organization and global trade was happening during the so-called Dark Ages, what else have we missed?